It's now my pleasure to introduce the next panel discussion, which is pivotal not only to today's event, but also to the world. The topic is ending global hunger. This session is going to be moderated by C.D. Glin, President, PepsiCo Foundation, and Global Head of Philanthropy at PepsiCo, Inc. Glin oversees the foundation's strategic direction, leading internal and external engagement around the PepsiCo Foundation's three core pillars of creating equitable access to nutritious food, safe water, and economic opportunity. He also launched the Journey to Zero Hunger podcast to help all of us understand how we can all work to eliminate world hunger by 2030. Glin will introduce his esteemed group of panelists, so please join me in welcoming to the stage C.D. Glin, Dr. Gérardine Mukeshimana, Doreen Ndishabandi, and Rebecca Vetharaniam. Welcome to our panel.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, this is the after lunch lull, so we're going to get this exciting. We're going to talk about global hunger because none of you are hungry, so probably a safe topic for this audience. I'm truly honored that the Conrad and Hilton Foundation has entrusted me to moderate this incredible lineup of panelists today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is C.D. Glin. I have the pleasure and the privilege of leading social impact in the PepsiCo Foundation. PepsiCo is one of the world's largest food and beverage companies. But more on that later. First, I'd like to introduce this amazing panel. So in the middle, we have Her Excellency, the Honorable Dr. Gérardine Mukeshimana. She's the Vice President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development and former Minister of Agriculture and Animal Resources for the Republic of Rwanda. And Dr. Gérardine is a rural development expert and scientist. She spent more than 20 years working to address issues that affect small-scale farmers' prosperity through agricultural policy and service delivery in rural areas and research. And directly next to me, we have Doreen Ndishabandi, who's the Chief People and Partnership Officer of the award-winning Acre Fund, Rwanda. For the last 3 years, she's focused on two areas of organizational strategy: systems change, impact, and people. Acre Fund systems change strategy aims to transform agricultural systems by leveraging the enormous existing potential and the years of close partnerships with governments and the private sector. And Doreen and I share something in common. She's a proud returned Peace Corps volunteer like myself. And on the far end, we have Rebecca Richards, who is the chief of the Global Network Against Food Crises, Humanitarian-Development Program and Policy Division of the World Food Program. It's a lot, big title, big impact. The Global Network Against Food Crises is an alliance of humanitarian and development actors united by the commitment to tackle the root causes of the food crisis and work to promote sustainable solutions through shared analysis and knowledge, strengthened coordination and evidence-based responses, and collective efforts across the humanitarian, development, and peace nexus. So here's a new acronym for you guys, HDP, the Humanitarian, Development, and Peace Nexus. This is what Rebecca is leading. So it's clear from those titles, from those organizations, from those jobs, it's clear why they're all here. But why is the guy who works for a soda company on the stage? So I'm here to talk to you about, yes, PepsiCo, and it's more co than it is Pepsi or Gatorade. At the end of the day, we source approximately 30 crops from more than 7 million acres in 60 countries for our family of brands that you know and hopefully that you love: Quaker Oats, Lay's potato chips, and then, guys, lots of toes. Fritos, Tostitos, Cheetos, Doritos, lots of toes in that portfolio. And what you should know is that those products make us rooted in agriculture. So when we think about Doritos, we think about corn. When we're thinking about Lay's, it's about potatoes and potato farmers. So yes, it's what's in the bag and how it's produced and how it's grown. So we're rooted in agriculture, and this footprint gives us a tremendous responsibility to make the entire food system stronger. We don't survive unless farming communities are thriving. This company doesn't exist unless farming communities are thriving. So that's why I talk about it as a privilege with pressure, because we have a responsibility as a company to do more. The world is facing dire hunger crises, and it's been exacerbated, as has been said, by the pandemic. Some stats, according to the latest UN estimates, around 735 million people suffered from hunger in 2022. That's 122 million more than compared to 2019. So all of us in this room today, we recognize the critical role that multi-sector partnerships play in implementing innovative solutions to end global hunger. And, which has been said this entire afternoon, that the key lies with our smallholder farmers, those smallholder farmers that produce a third of the world's food. So again, I'm pleased to be joined by these experts, and pleased to, after having spent the vast majority of my career trying to get the private sector to the table and on the stage with NGO leaders and philanthropic leaders and multilateral stakeholder leaders, I'm grateful that I'm on the stage representing the private sector, but with the leaders who are going to help transform the food system. So with that, let me get started. Again, I'm representing corporate philanthropic. Gérardine, you have previous experience working at the national level with the Rwandan government. Rebecca, you have extensive experience working in international multilateral organizations. And Doreen, grassroots, bottom-up driven development in local communities. Same question to all of you. With the diversity of experiences and the vantage points that you all have held, let's talk about what it will take to end global hunger. What approaches, what collaborations, what partnerships have worked well. Let's start with the positive aspect that this is something that we can do. Let's start with you, Doreen.
All right. Thank you so much, CD, and huge thanks to the Hilton Prize Foundation for having us here. I think my job was actually made easier by Andrew. One of the things that he said is that sometimes when we think about the range of crises happening, whether it's climate, it's conflict, it's global pandemics, those challenges make global hunger and food security in this conversation seem really overwhelming, and sometimes those challenges also feel really insurmountable. But one of the things that we know is we already actually have a lot of the tools that we need to address these challenges. One is we can learn a lot from previous crises. We can also learn from previous agriculture transformations. When we look at what happened in Latin America and Asia, one of the things that we learned is smallholder farmers worldwide need access to a set of productivity factors, relatively simple and consistent productivity factors, in receiving high-quality agricultural inputs on time, in receiving access to financing, access to agronomic training, access to post-harvest support, market access, and then increasingly, obviously, longer-lasting solutions to climate resilience. And sometimes I think, as someone said, sometimes we just overly complicate the problem. And for me, what I would say is that let's start with what we already know to be true. Let's start with the tools that we already have and figure out how we can more efficiently and effectively deploy them much faster.
I love it. So there are solutions out there. Let's scale them. Let's go faster. Let's go bigger. Let's go better. Dr. Gérardine, you've led a country through agricultural transformation, addressing global hunger. What's working well? What approaches? What partnerships? What advice do you have for us?
First of all, let me start by congratulating Acre Fund. They have been my partners, so we have been together on the journey, so I'm so proud of what is happening. And if I start, what has worked well, they are winning the Hilton Prize, a humanitarian prize. That is really something positive to start with. And I think numbers have tells us that until 2015, the numbers of hungry and food insecure was going down. And from 2015 up to now, they have been going up again. But what was driving the numbers down was that, again, science worked, collaboration worked. There has been some investments, technology is there, and humanity thought that working together is important. And there have been so many organizations that are looking at addressing food insecurity, addressing food insecurity, nutrition. And there has been some positives that happened. And of course, of recent, numbers have been going up, but to me, human being has realized early enough that probably what was being that time wasn't enough, and there did something, and I think this is the time again to rethink how we can jumpstart again and be able to bring down the numbers that we see.
And that's a great optimistic note that science is collaboration is working. There are positive things that even though we're looking at this current reality with numbers going up, that there's hope springs eternal, that we are onto something if we look at the solutions. Somebody who's on the front lines, literally on the front lines of crisis and famine, Rebecca, what's worked well in terms of approaches, in terms of partnerships, collaboration?
So I think the work of the One Acre Fund is a perfect example of grassroots level community-based action. I think when that joins together with government, with multilateral stakeholders, you start to see a real shift in the paradigm, a real chance to talk about lasting solutions. Because what we find so often, and this is the reason why, as Dr. Gérardine said, those numbers are going up, is because hunger is a cycle. It's a vicious cycle. COVID, conflict, climate change, they all contribute to reversing the positive actions that are taken. And so the fundamental way, especially if I look at the fact that famine, and we are living in a world today where we see famine, more than 100,000 people suffer from famine, and for us, the technical terminology, when we look at famine, when we unpack it, we're talking about death. We're talking about real starvation. So to live in a world where there's surplus food, but yet we see this, you have to ask yourself the question, why? But those numbers have been going down. And why? Because we're able to, as the World Food Programme, get in there and meet urgent food needs and stand between families and famine, families and starvation, who are on the brink. 160 million in more than 120 countries and territories we serve every year. Those are big numbers, Sidi, but those numbers will keep recurring and coming back unless we do things differently, unless there's a change in partnerships. One example that's really gives me hope is Niger. In Niger, we've been working there, I think, 5-6 years, a community-based program very much built on the actions that you saw in the One Acre Fund, but connected to schools, connected to policy, connected to government. And over time, more than 500,000 people no longer need food aid. Now, that's the world we need to be striving towards, and it gives you great hope when you see Niger is still a country facing conflict, facing climate change, but when people no longer need food aid, we're doing something right.
It can feel daunting and sound daunting when you sort of say hunger is a cycle and famine is death. I mean, that's a really, really, really powerful statement and sentiment. And, you know, we're all here to celebrate the 2023 Hilton Humanitarian Prize winner that is dedicated to working in parts of Africa where most people living on $1 a day, has been mentioned, are smallholder farmers. So we heard co-founder Yun once say, and said this afternoon, the idea of bringing in food aid to feed farmers whose profession it is to grow food is totally absurd. Feeding them, creating dependence rather than empowering people to grow food themselves and to feed themselves. So when I hear those sentiments, I can't think about his leader, one of the leaders for One Acre Fund in Rwanda. I'm wondering, Doreen, what's your reaction to that? You are living day to day on the front lines of addressing that challenge, that sentiment. What do you feel like your responses are versus other responses to emergency food aid and the challenges and the absurdity, if you will, that Andrew mentioned?
Yeah, thanks for that question, CD. I think I would want to start off from a safe place of saying that global hunger is a very multifaceted challenge. And I think it's...
There's somebody from WFP on the end who will have something to say about whatever you say.
I am trying to be very careful about... it's very multifaceted, and I think there are a lot of complexities and nuances around it, and I think it's one of those issues where context becomes really, really important. And I think there are many spaces and many contexts, especially now with the range of conflicts we're seeing around the world, where emergency food aid becomes, critically important. With that said, I believe that despite its potentially powerful impact, one of the things that food aid does is that it doesn't address the underlying and the fundamental drivers behind the global food challenge. And it also doesn't effectively equip communities with the ability to feed themselves sustainably. I think the example that Rebecca gave of Niger is really powerful around how do you transition communities to be able to grow enough food to feed themselves over a period of time. Again, I would come back to let's deploy the tools that we know work. Let's deploy those agricultural productivity factors effectively to farmers, because unlike food aid, if we do that consistently, one, it will lead to permanent increases in farmers' yields, but two, it can create farmers into these unique and efficient engines of food security within their own communities. If we look at the region of the world where we operate, it was mentioned earlier that smallholder farmers in Africa are meeting about 80% of the continent's food supply. That's already a really powerful pillar of the continent's food security. The challenge, yes, is that those farmers are not able to produce food at the capacity that the continent needs them to, or sometimes to even meet their own needs. And I think that's where Acre Fund sees this as a really critical leverage point in addressing what we believe is one of the, I would say, most profound moral failings of our time. We think that there's an opportunity for us to deploy the resources we have and the tools we have to make a more permanent dent in that, in addressing global hunger in a way that is sustainable and has more lasting impact.
Dr. Gérardine, I'm going to come back to you, but first I want to, since we're on this topic of emergency aid and the quote from Andrew, I can't help but think, Rebecca, of sort of the thought process that you have on prevention versus emergency aid. Sort of how do you think about those two issues, preventing the catastrophe before you have to respond to it as WFP, but also the role of agricultural development? That's why I'm going to come to Dr. Géraldine. But sort of how are you thinking about prevention versus emergency responses?
The question's a great one, and I have to first completely agree with Doreen on the fact that tackling the root causes is the key. So we're pretty good, and especially at the World Food Programme, very proud of it. Got the Nobel Peace Prize for a reason, but we're very good.
A lot of prizes on the stage.
had to get it in there. Can't blame me. So we're very good at treating the symptoms, but how good are we at treating the cause? And when we actually talk about root causes, it's complicated. And I know that the minister on my right will have a better sense of that than anyone, but it's tied to the governance of natural resources. It's tied to structures, systems, things a little bit beyond our control, but really which the politicians and regional organizations, global powers need to be supporting and tackling. And that's the prevention piece that we don't talk about enough, but that's the key to making sure things are sustainable. Now, there's one number I need to share with you, Sidi, but the largest reason for hunger in the world.
All right, wait for it. The largest reason for hunger.
I'll start with the term conflict. Right, Peter opened it this morning, and I couldn't help but think, wow, we're setting the tone for the day. It's critical. 117 million people are hungry because of conflict. So when we talk about aid, I couldn't agree with Andrew more. We don't want to create dependency, but what happens in those countries, northeastern Nigeria, Boko Haram comes in, farmers are forced to leave their land. Afghanistan, where I spent some of my time career-wise, conflict, earthquake, beginning of the month, fields are gone. What do? You have only one choice in those circumstances. But prevention in that context is peace. So where are the peacemakers? Now, it's complicated, and I don't want to tread into any territory that I shouldn't, but political will is the cornerstone of prevention when it comes to hunger. But in addition to that, if you look at the types of conflicts, it's not just international conflicts. We're talking about local community conflicts within communities, across borders. There's a lot that can be done, even through the provision of food security, to provide social cohesion, to bring communities together. And I think that's unexplored. But that's another piece of the puzzle when it comes to prevention. And I think the third is the knowledge, CD. Like, we're so lucky. We have a partnership with PepsiCo in Libya. Libya is helping WFP to help the communities to grow resilient crops so that they can withstand climate shocks. We need to look at the private sector. We need to engage them differently. It's not about resources, it's about intellect, technical capacity, and bring that into the prevention conversation.
You know, it's powerful when I'm listening, when you sort of said hunger is cyclical, it's a cycle, and then I think about the quote, a hungry man is an angry man, right? And it's sort of like, which comes first? Is it the hunger that leads to the conflict? Is it the conflict that leads to hunger? Or is it this cycle? And so it's a powerful sentiment that came from your response. Two questions, Dr. Gérardine. One, anything that you'd like to add around emergency response, prevention, because of your transformational leadership for almost a decade of leading the Ministry of Agriculture in Rwanda. Now you've taken your talents to the global stage with IFAD. We also would love to hear how you think beyond the immediate response of prevention and emergency response to agricultural transformation, agricultural development, and the win-win-win, the multiple effects of investing in smallholder farmers in rural areas.
Thank you, Sid. I think you got it before me. Rebecca was saying that conflicts are causing hunger, but food insecurity and hunger are causing conflicts as well. So, I mean, it goes both ways. But when you look at what is happening actually, and the numbers going back, sometimes we tend to say, oh, it's COVID, it's war in Ukraine, but I do not think so. Hunger and food insecurity have been even there before, and most of it is a result of decades and decades of lack of investments into agriculture sector and small-scale farmers. So, I mean, there is a time people were saying that food from Ukraine is now getting where it's supposed to be. And my response was like, but Ukraine did what most of us refused to do, which is investing in food production, which is investing in knowledge of our people. So it kept being same circle. But as I think Doreen mentioned that 2% of our small-scale farmers are living in a rural area, and that's where the poverty and food insecurity is located. And anything that is targeting poverty, that is targeting food insecurity, that is targeting inequality should be looking at that specific location where the rural is, the poor is. And these people who are producing 7% of the food that the world is consuming, I mean, it's a good investment. So why aren't we investing in them so that they can be able to supply the food that we all need? I work for an organization that was created in 1977, and IFAD was created as a result of food crisis that were there in 1974. And then the world leaders realized that that food crisis wasn't a result of lack of food production. It was a result of structural poverty that was affecting many of the people who were in rural areas. So they said, let us make a fund that can contribute to rural poverty and food security. That's how IFAD invests all of the money, its member states' money into the rural development and the food security. Coming back to the emergency versus investment,
yeah.
I think...
And you're in the investment business now.
I am. But what it is like, or probably as humanity, we love to hear the short term and the quick wins. Because if you were at WFP, you will go, you provide a granola bar, and you feel like the kid who was crying is stopping crying. But if you invest into a farmer that is producing orange fresh sweet potatoes, it will take 4 months for him to harvest. Therefore, if you are to solve an immediate situation, you rather provide a granola bar. So without offense, you will find that my friend Rebecca and WFP will be probably investing 10 billion per year, while IFAD will be they will be mobilizing 10 billion per year, while IFAD will be mobilizing probably 1 billion per year. That tells you how, as humanity, we have been approaching these rural poverty, food insecurity issues. So, but I am here to tell you that any single dollar that we are investing today into sustainability and resilience is going to save $10 to the world.
Let's say that again, Doctor. A dollar today is...
That we are investing in resilience is going to be saving the world $10, probably 10 years to come. So, we love to put our money where our mouth is, but we need also to look at what is making sense. So it's important that we invest in immediate safety nets, but also equally it's important that we look at what is going to be sustainable and invest in the future.
You want to jump in?
Can I jump back in?
Of course.
I couldn't agree more. I think the key that's missing, though, is that you need to bring it together. So emergency aid is sometimes the only choice, but if you combine it with the investments that Dr. Gérardine is making, then you start to see change longer term. So I think the key message here is about bringing humanitarian development and peace together in the same place.
It sounds like HDP. It sounds like humanitarian development and peace, that nexus that you're working on. You know, there's another nexus that we work on at PepsiCo, and we talk about transforming food system. We talk about a sustainable food system. We talk about a regenerative food system and an inclusive food system. So how people are farming, but also who's farming. So Doreen, share a little bit of your thoughts around the gender dynamics that you've observed when it comes to smallholder farmers and their access to land, credit, markets. How do these realities impact the vulnerabilities to them experiencing hunger? And what organizations such as yours are doing to support women as resilient agents of change?
Thank you. So I'm actually going to I'm going to respond to your question first with a farmer story. Acre Fund loves telling stories of our clients because sometimes when we talk about women, particularly African women or women farmers, sometimes the takeaway is that they are vulnerable. But one of the most impressive women I've ever met in my life is a woman called Emma. I met her in 2018. She joined Acre Fund. Within a few seasons, she was able to double her yields. Then she used that to actually encourage a lot of her friends to join. They joined, started a savings group, used the savings to actually start a juice production company. At the time when I met them, they had actually bought machinery to start producing chili for export to the Congo. There's a multiplier effect to a lot of those stories. And I think one of the takeaways before I respond to your question is I hope people can walk away remembering that women, African women farmers, are actually at the front lines of this discussion that we are having. So they are not vulnerable. They are actually the agents of the change that we're trying to implement. With that said, it is unfortunate that they are also overrepresented when we're looking at the most affected, when we're looking at the most extreme poor, especially at peak productivity ages between the age of 25 and 34. There was a really sad UNDP report that actually said that African women only achieve 87% of the human development outcomes of men. In the agriculture sector, this is driven by a number of issues. One is just access to quality agriculture inputs, to services, to information, to technology, to bank accounts, to participation in cooperatives. You can go on and on and on. Women also have a high time poverty where they're spending more time on unpaid labor. They have gendered restrictions on their time and their mobility. There is a very gendered aspect to the challenge. As a result, what we do see is about a 12 to 20% yield difference per acre between men and women farmers. And then that is compounded by a similar gender gap in household decision making, particularly in how farm income is spent. So one of the things that we do know is all these challenges that we're talking about, particularly extreme global poverty or global hunger, a lot of it is actually also driven by unequal gender norms that have been perpetuated across different agriculture transformations. So it's not just even within the spirit that we're talking about. What is encouraging is as we increase access to a lot of these productivity factors for women farmers, we start seeing that gap close. And I was looking at very encouraging numbers from the Food and Agriculture Administration, where they say that closing the gender gap in farm productivity and income would increase global GDP by 1%, so that's about $1 trillion. It would reduce food security by 2% globally, and it would also increase the number of food insecure people by 45 million. If that doesn't rally all of us behind this, I don't know what else does. And then when you're talking about access to land rights, there's also evidence that there are cascading benefits from increasing land rights for women. In many households, you'll see a higher allocation of budget towards food. You'll see less severe risk around malnutrition and stunting. You'll see higher chances of children going to school. So those are some of the things that we've identified. And as an organization, there's been a lot of learning for us as well. We are not satisfied with where we are. So actually, Acre Fund has recently made new commitments around deepening our understanding of the norms that perpetuate this, but also focusing on more gender transformative solutions that don't just address the symptoms of the issue, but start addressing the structural barriers that underpin the issues that women farmers face.
No, I love that. It's sort of like your rallying cry is do two things: invest in Acre Fund and invest in women. It's sort of like that's the solution to this. We have really, really short time remaining, but Dr. Gérardine and Rebecca, I'd love it if you could close us out again on that spirit of positive hope of I feel like we have get-to-do jobs. You know, some people go to bed at night, wake up in the morning, I have to do this, I have to do that. We have get-to-do jobs. We get to help make the world a better place. So I would love for you to leave us with some thoughts around a call to action, but also what gives you hope? You know, you've just taken this new global role. What gives you hope in terms of addressing food insecurity? And the same thing with you, Rebecca. Every day you wake up and look at the news in a very different way, but what would you want us to know, but also what gives you hope that we can live and create a world without hunger? First, Dr. Gérardine.
Last month, global leaders were in New York. They were crying that the world is failing to achieve SDGs. Number one reason that we are failing is that we have failed to address issues of poverty. Poverty, where it is associated with food and insecurity and hunger. The second reason that we are failing is that the world has failed to address inequality. That said, it's a fact that is there, but we have a hope that working together, investing more in small-scale farmers, we can address the issues of food insecurity, therefore address inequality in gender and the vulnerable indigenous group that Doreen is speaking for, and we can be able to go back on track.
No, I love it, I love it. Close us out, Rebecca.
So, Siri, there are many things that give me hope. You started our session by saying that our smallholder farmers could feed 1/3 of the world. Food and Agricultural Organization's report says 680 million smallholder farmers globally. That's why it's just so fabulous that One Acre has won the prize today. But 40% of what they produce is lost. Now, why is that? That's because the agricultural value chain at a country level requires support, storage, harvesting, transfer from the field right to the table, as we say. And what gives me hope is that we're looking at partnerships differently. It's super exciting to see the way that today's been put together. It's really breaking the mold. The traditional way of doing business doesn't work. We need to be bringing in different types of partners, different types of thinking. I think there was a ham policy earlier today.
Yeah.
I love that, and it's right that the World Food Programme would subscribe to the ham policy, but we need to break out of our traditional way of doing business, forge different partnerships, and keep the people that we're trying to reach at the center of our planning.
I love it. Let's go fast, but let's go further together. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.